You know what the worst part is right now? The lawyers are in charge.
Left an orphan with a princely fortune. 16 years old, he married to one of the most influential families in France. Not so shabby. Lafayette chose to follow the career of his father, however, and he entered the Guards. He was 19 and a captain in the Dragoons when the British colonies in America proclaimed their independence. He later wrote in his memoirs, "At the first of the news of this quarrel, my heart was enrolled in it." So he was a 19-year-old aristocrat from France with a passion for liberty. Lafayette came to the colonies against the warning of his king, hoping to join our fight for freedom. King Louis XVI prohibited Lafayette's departure and arrested him. He escaped. He boarded a ship that he had bought with his own money and managed to elude 2 British ships that were sent to recapture him. He taught himself as much English as he could on his ship's voyage over to the colonies. He was originally introduced to Washington by Benjamin Franklin, and again later by General Nathanael Greene. Washington and Lafayette formed a fast friendship, and when Congress hesitated to promote Lafayette over colonial officers, he volunteered to serve in the Army for the duration of our war, no matter how long it was, without pay. Knowing a good deal when they heard one, Congress appointed him a major general. Washington and Lafayette became so close that Washington was quoted as saying, "Lafayette was like a son to me." The childless general and the orphaned aristocrat seemed like an unlikely match, but they soon developed a surrogate father-son relationship. It was thus that Lafayette distinguished himself among the large, colorful group of European soldiers of fortune that had come to the United States, hoping to make a name for themselves. Frederick William von Steuben, who trained our soldiers. Thaddeus Kosciuszko, who was Washington's chief engineer. He would go ahead of Washington and survey the sites for Washington's redoubts and forts. And Casimir Pulaski of Poland, who had joined the Continental Army to fight for American independence. But the more Washington saw of the young Frenchman, the more impressed he was and the closer they became. Lafayette served on Washington's staff for 6 weeks, and after fighting with distinction at the Battle of Brandywine in Pennsylvania, on September 11th, 1777, he was given command of his own division. With Washington's permission, he returned to France in 1779 to consult with the king, who was not too happy with him, but he became an advocate for American liberty at the French court, and he worked with American emissaries Benjamin Franklin and John Adams to help persuade the government of Louis XVI to send additional troops and supplies to aid the colonists. He returned to America after 6 months and was ultimately permitted to command the Continental Army troops at the Siege of Yorktown, the Revolutionary War's final major battle. After returning to France, he became a major figure in the French Revolution and was imprisoned for a period of time in Austria. He was celebrated as a hero in both France and the United States, earning him the nickname the Hero of Two Worlds. Washington and Lafayette remained close for the rest of their lives. So close were the two men, and such was Lafayette's dedication to the democracy of the United States, that at the end of the French Revolution, Lafayette sent his friend, President Washington, a gift from France. He had sent across the Atlantic the key from the infamous political prison, the Bastille. To this day, the key to the Bastille remains at Washington's Virginia home, Mount Vernon. So revered was Lafayette that in 1824, President James Monroe invited General Lafayette to our 50th anniversary celebrations to tour the country that he had fought for, and he was named a guest of our nation. which was a very large distinction at that time. He traveled to all 24 states that were part of the Union. Crowds by the thousands greeted him, and he was lauded in cities across the United States. His visit included emotional stops at Washington's grave and at Monticello, where the ailing 81-year-old Jefferson received his old friend. Lafayette became the first foreign citizen to address the U.S. House of Representatives, and dozens of cities across the country were named in his honor because of this tour. It was during this tour through Massachusetts that he stopped to visit the citizens of Ware. His visit is described in the Chase History of Ware as follows. At the time, there were about 1,600 inhabitants in the town. There were no buildings on the south side of Main Street, only a greensward. The men of the town stood in line, and after the general had met the ladies at a tavern, he came across the street and shook hands with all of the men. He is described as a man of commanding presence with fine features. He was accompanied by his son, and after the ceremony overtook his carriage and drove out of town, being accompanied as far as the home of Calvin Morris by the townspeople of Ware, walking single file on either side of the carriage, the women on one side, the men on the other, Lafayette bowing to the left and the right in recognition of the crowd. The general had stopped at that time to rest under a large elm tree during his visit to Ware, which became known as the Lafayette elm. That tree was lost to us in July of 1923. In 2016, the Ware Historical Commission honored General Lafayette by planting a new Valley Forge American elm tree to commemorate his visit. We are celebrating in this location today because that tree and monument are on my left. I must tell you that when we dedicated this tree, it was a 6-foot-tall stick. In the 9 years this location has been its home, it has grown into the tree you see today. It has a little ways to go to catch up to the original tree, which was said to be 75 feet tall, with a 200-foot canopy, a 7-foot diameter, and a 20-foot circumference. But with the care it receives from the dedication of the staff here at the school and the watchful eye of the Historical Commission, we have high hopes that our new elm will rival the original. We hope that the general approves when he arrives. At the stop Lafayette made in Boston, he sent his son to a particular site to collect dirt to take home to France with them, as it was his wish to be buried under the soil from both France and the United States. He departed the United States on his farewell tour from Washington, D.C. on the USS Brandywine, the ship named after one of the many battles in which Lafayette fought. When General Lafayette passed away in 1834, his son, George Washington Lafayette, fulfilled his burial wish by covering his father's coffin with the dirt they had taken from Bunker Hill. In 2002, our Congress made Lafayette an honorary citizen of the United States, an honor given to only 8 other people. Lafayette and Mother Teresa are the only 2 individuals made honorary citizens by the United States by a direct act of Congress. I hope this gives you an idea of the importance of this 19-year-old man that grew to be a courageous general of the Continental Army and a legend of the French Revolution, a friend to the United States of America, a dedicated comrade to George Washington, and a supporter of democracy in all countries. And you will get to meet him today. It is indeed a thrill for the town of Ware. While I have your ear, I have a few thank yous. First of all, to the Ware Community Band and Joanne Pajak for playing for us today. to Dan at the school and Bill Alderman for the setup, to Katie Racis, Mike Brown, Stuart Beckley, and always present Stanley Chukai, who makes sure that every citizen can see these events. My fellow commissioners on the Ware Historical Commission, always willing to do what it takes, even though it's a volunteer job. They work tirelessly when our hearts are always in it for the town of Ware. To the American Friends of Lafayette, who sponsored this tour for the last year, they will be continuing on until it is over, recreating all of the stops. I have had the privilege of standing in front of the house in Savannah, Georgia, in which Lafayette spoke on the balcony for 4 continuous hours. We will not let him do that today. The Ware School Board for their approval of this event on their property because of the location. And to Chris, who you will meet momentarily when Lafayette arrives, and his 2 lovely horses, Pete and Leroy. I would like to thank everybody for coming today. It really is an illustrious event for the town of Ware. I also would like to let you know that we have an illustrious author with us today, Stephen Katz, who has produced many books about the town of Ware, Ware's Boys of Summer, Candy Cummings, and the Kaplan Block. He is with us today. He has traveled from New York. We are very grateful that he's here. So please enjoy the rest of the music. He should be here very soon. And we will let the band continue to play for you. please rise for the French and then the United States national anthem. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you the hero of two worlds, General Lafayette.
Mesdames et messieurs, chers amis, good people of Ware, my dear, dear friends, please allow me an introduction. The name is General Lafayette, though I believe that some of you may know me far better by my name of the Ancien Régime, of the old order of the Revolution here in America. And that, of course, is Marie-Joseph Polivroc Gilbert de Motier, le Marquis de Lafayette. Would you like to repeat that? Truly, what a pleasure and honor it is to see all of you here on this, well, rather gloomy day, but this magnificent day, this 14th day of June of the year 1825, but nonetheless a day of celebration, is it not? Indeed, my friends, we are celebrating many, many things. I am celebrating my first return back to America in 40 long years. Yes, in truth, the last time I set foot upon American soil was back in 1784, just after the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which of course occurred in September of 1783, ending the Great War for American freedom. So thus I return for 6 months to celebrate with all of you, my beloved brothers and sisters here in America. But even though 40 years have passed, we must never forget how that independence was in fact achieved. For all of those brave soldiers, sailors, and Marines alike who have fought and bled upon countless battlefields to achieve American freedom, let us applaud them all! Well, no doubt you are aware that last year, in February of this year, 1824, I received an invitation by the former President of the United States, James Monroe, to be what he was calling a guest of the nation, to tour all 24 United States. Goodness, can you imagine? 24. Do you realize, monsieur, the last time I was here, you had but 13. Oh, goodness, at this rate, you'll have as many as 50 one day. Could you imagine? Well, as so many adventures began, mine began in New York City, in front of 90,000 of its inhabitants on the 16th day of August, 1824. I traveled northwards to the upper part of that state, crossing over to Connecticut, onward to Rhode Island, Providence to be sure, into this great state of Massachusetts, onwards to Boston. I even went to Quincy, madame, where I met your second president, Monsieur John Adams. And do you know, madame, it was he and Monsieur Jefferson who once said of me that I had a canine appetite for popularity. Still not quite sure what to make of that, but it was a pleasant visit regardless. I traveled southwards. I went onwards to the great city of Philadelphia. I went to that place where you declared for independence. In fact, I referred to it as Independence Hall, and I hope that name will stick. Onwards to Baltimore, and then, of course, to the federal city of Washington, where I met, and I thank the president for his kind invitation. But friends, since I have arrived, I have not only traveled to places that I had been before, but many places that I had never been before. For this great nation has indeed grown from 13 to 24 United States. So it would be in this year of 1825. By the beginning of that year, I traveled southwards, through Virginia, into North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. I had never been to Georgia. Onwards to Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, up the Mississippi River into Kentucky, into the Ohio Valley, into Tennessee, Indiana, western Pennsylvania, western New York, and now I have returned once again to Massachusetts Bay. A place that I had been before, but never this far west. And I am delighted to meet newfound and old friends that I had served with during the American Revolution. But now that I have returned, I am certainly reminded of what first inspired me to cross the great ocean and to take part in this noble crusade. A crusade that many of you or your forefathers had fought in. I do recall it was back in 1775, a pivotal year for me. Have any of you ever experienced a moment in your lives where after that moment, the rest of your life would change? I think all of us, to a degree, have experienced such a thing. Well, 1775 was one such year for me. You see, I had found myself, after my marriage, billeted in the eastern part of France in a city called Metz, and as was commonplace back then, we would often have these grandiose dinner parties with all of the most noble officers in attendance, typically speaking about the various subjects of the day. Perhaps a war that had begun, a war that had concluded, a new treaty that had been signed, perhaps a new innovation in strategy or in tactics. But on one occasion we had a very special guest, and this guest was none other than the Duke of Gloucester. Many of you might look at me and say, well, who is this Duke of Gloucester? Well, he happens to be the brother to George III, the King of England. But unlike his brother, the King of England, the Duke of Gloucester was rather sympathetic to the American cause. In fact, many were of the opinion that he thought America should be free and independent. So we all listened in on what he had to say. We spoke of many subjects. We spoke of the fighting at Lexington and at Concord, of the Grand Congress in Philadelphia, and of the great man himself, that of General Washington. So it was, by the conclusion of this meal, that I told my brother officers that I was ready and willing to fight and, if need be, die for this cause. Now I know what you're all thinking. Why, Monsieur le Marquis? Why would you want to go and fight and perhaps die in another man's war? For France and England were not at war at that moment. Why would you want to risk yourself in such an endeavor? Well, I believe you know the answer to that question. For this had been a war like none other in the history of man, had it not? This was a war of great ideas, of the freedom, even the liberation of mankind, a war that had embraced the ideas of the great thinkers of what we often refer to as this enlightened age. Some refer to it as an age of reason, with men like Voltaire and Rousseau and Montesquieu and Locke. And what were they speaking of? Representation in government, of an equality of mankind. So it was with this inspiration that I decided to make plans to come to America. I would request permission of the king, it would be denied. But have you ever wanted to take part in something, and even though you were told you could not, you did it anyway? Well, I think we all have at one point in our lives, and this was the point in my life where I disobeyed the king. I met with an American agent in Paris who bestowed upon me a promissory note of Major General in the American Army. So I set sail across the great ocean, ingratiated myself with your Congress, with Washington, would be made a Major General, and would fight throughout the great war for American independence until independence was assured. I would take part in that great victory at Yorktown in Virginia that concluded on 19 October 1781. From that moment forward, I dare say, the world would change. But friends, as I begin the sunset of my life and the sunset of my visit here to America, I wonder that after I am long gone, how shall I, General Lafayette, be remembered? Well, I am hopeful that I shall be remembered as a man who fought for American independence, was willing to shed his blood and give his life in her defense. Because when I met Washington for the first time in Philadelphia, the 5th of August, 1777, I said to him, "J'ai deux patries, la France et les États-Unis d'Amérique." I have two countries now, France and the United States of America. So certainly, I am hopeful that you will remember me as a son of America and a dear friend of Washington. I hope you will remember me as a man who was able to assist with the Grande Alliance, the alliance betwixt France and America. For it would be France that would be the first nation in the world to recognize the United States of America as its own free and independent nation. And with that, she declared war upon England, turning it from a revolt, a rebellion, a civil war, to a world war. And with that, victory would be assured. But I am also hopeful that I would be a friend of the enslaved, that a man who fought against the horrible institution of slavery. It was before the war had come to a conclusion, in 1782, that I wrote a lengthy letter to Washington. I spoke of many subjects, but amongst them was the horrible institution of slavery. I said to Washington, "You would be an even greater man than you already are if you could set the example by emancipating the slaves, thereby others could follow your example and you could eradicate this horrible institution." Washington responded with kind words, saying that I was a credit to humanity for making such a suggestion, but felt it could not be done immediately, had to be done slowly and through legislation for fear of a grand slave revolt on par with that of the great Spartacus of the 1st century BC. But I believe action speaks louder than words. So thus I would lend my voice, my right arm, my pen, and my purse until my dying day to end this horrible institution. Dear friends, I am hopeful also that I shall be known as a friend of the indigenous population of America. Indeed, it was in 1778 that your very own Congress dispatched me to Albany in New York, there to take part in an expedition for the invasion of Canada. I was to make it the 14th state. Alas, it was not to be, dear friends. It was called off for lack of troops and supplies. But nonetheless, while I was in Albany, the commander of that region, General Philip Schuyler, dispatched me to parley, to speak with members of the Iroquois-speaking peoples known as the Oneida. Many of you, of course, are familiar with the Iroquois, the Mohawk, the Seneca, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, the Tuscarora, and the Oneida. Well, I began to parley with the Oneida, hoping that they would form an alliance betwixt themselves and the Americas. And I had never met them before, but I became fascinated with them. And much to my surprise, they became fascinated with me. So much so that their sachems and tribal elders adopted me into their tribe, bestowing upon me an Oneida name, which means Kuayalea, great warrior. And so thus I became Oneida. It is interesting to note, dear friends, that the Oneida do not refer to themselves as the Oneida. They refer to themselves as the Oneataka. And in their tongue, the Oneataka means the people of the standing stone. They are of the belief that this ancient culture is like a stone that juts out from the earth. It can endure everything, the test of time, the weather. The years will pass and the stone will remain, yet the markings of time will remain behind that stone. They believe they can learn from those markings, from the test of time. Can you imagine, dear friends, learning from the past to make you a better citizen of the future? I think we can all learn from the Oneataka. But I am also hopeful that you will remember me as a man who fought for the rights of mankind. When my revolution would come to France on the 14 Juillet, the 14th of July, 1789, I had already befriended an American you know well, Thomas Jefferson, the writer of your Declaration of Independence. He had been dispatched to France in 1784 to serve as ambassador there. And from 1784 to 1789, we had developed a great friendship. When my revolution came, I wrote a document with the assistance of Monsieur Jefferson called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. And in this said document that would serve as a preamble to all French constitutions, I spoke of those natural rights of mankind that regardless of your nation you should be able to enjoy. Some of those rights being life, liberty, property, the pursuit of happiness, and freedom from oppression. My dear friends, I hope I can, until my dying day, fight for those noble rights that all peoples should be able to enjoy. Dear friends, America is my country, just as it is yours. I love it with all my heart, just as I love my beloved France. And when I think back to the last time I saw His Excellency General Washington, which was 1784, we had spent 2 glorious weeks together at his beloved Mount Vernon, there reflecting upon the war and the future of this nation. We rode on to a place called Annapolis in Maryland, said goodbye to many of the officers we had the honor and privilege to have served with, and then onwards to a place called Marlborough in Maryland, and that is where I would say my goodbyes. But not before the General said this to me. He said, Monsieur le Marquis, I sincerely believe that the easy part was winning this war. I could not imagine he would say such a thing after all of the trials and tribulations we had been through, but he explained himself further by saying, I do believe that the much more difficult part will be for these 13 former colonies that have now formed 13 United States, well, getting along with one another, surviving into the future. Well, my dear friends, look at how far you have gone. From 13 to 24 United States, you have endured war, civil strife, turmoil, yet you have endured. And why is that? Well, I dare say it is because of the foundation that was built at the price of so much sacrifice and blood by you, the American patriot. In fact, I will go further. I will say one day this nation shall serve as a beacon for all other nations to look to as the truest example of freedom and of independence. God bless you all, my dear friends, and God bless this great nation of the United States of America.
Our deepest gratitude to the General for stopping here in Ware today. We would like to give you the opportunity to speak with him. Please stay. He will walk among you, and to take pictures at his elm tree. Okay. Thank you, everyone.